Welcome to 28 Days and Beyond, where we reflect and celebrate on our history, our heritage, our culture, and our own authentic voice. And I'm your host, Alexander Evans, and my co-host, Amari Johnson.
How you doing?
We're doing good, man. Amari, we're going to talk about why is it critically important from an internal perspective that we have a good sense of who we are when it comes to our identity and our character.
Got you. You're talking specifically as black men?
Black men.
All right, so break it down.
So I believe that if you don't have a good sense of self and you don't have a good sense of how you built and what your innate ability, you will have others define who you are. And that will change predicated on what mood they're in, what standards they're setting for you, and how you can go about creating your own identity independent of others. Yeah. Knowing who are the originators of Earth, originators of mankind. And I think that stems back from history on how we don't know where we come from, you know, as far as legacy is concerned. And then that can impact how we perceive ourselves and those who are around us.
So you talk about this sort of sense of self. We know that nobody exists within a vacuum, right? And you're talking about a young boy moving into adolescence, into adulthood. How are they going to acquire that sense of self?
Well, how are they going to acquire that sense of self? Well, I'll put it to you this way. I'll talk about me, right? So I had markers. So in every family, you got the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Now, it depends on tendencies and depends on what insight, that innate ability that you get at an early age, that can determine how you go about doing things. So for instance, I grew up in a single parent home. I understood the effects of not having a dad around. Therefore, as a young man, I decided on myself that if I am going to be a father, I'm not going to make the same decision. And if that relationship gets broken, then I'm going to make sure I'm there to raise my kid. Because I understood intrinsically, not having that person in my life, how it can impact me.
But even if not having a father in the home, you still had men around you,
correct? I still had men around me.
So how did that play into this whole situation?
So my grandfather was very significant in my life. I patterned myself after him and his integrity and his character. My uncles, you know, and they was the defenders of the family. Right. So for me, and they was strong in their person. Yeah. You know, they protected the home and the community. So that's the kind of environment I grew up in. And it was a little gangster.
You stuck out, son. You stuck out.
So, but there was a level of respect, and there was order as well in our neighborhoods. You couldn't do certain things in our neighborhood. Yeah. You wasn't permitted to come in there and defile anybody in our neighborhood without catching some havoc.
But what is that to say? Because that to me sounds like a code of ethics and honor. Yeah. Right. So I mean, you know, especially because I'm thinking of this movie. It was a book by Walter Mosley, Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned. And it was a situation, as a scene. I saw the movie with Lawrence Fishburne. And there was a scene where they were standing around in a living room, all the men of the community. And they said, oh, you know, such and such son is terrorizing the community. He beat on this woman and he's pushing drugs and all of that sort of thing. And they said, all right. And as a collective of men, they decided how they were going to handle that situation. Some said they were going to beat him up. Some said they were going to call a cop. Some said they were going to drive him out of the community. But to me, that was what manhood is all about. It's coming together to make decisions that ultimately have the well-being of the community in mind. And luckily, when we come back, we'll have an expert. Gregory Walker is the founder and creative director of the Brothers Network, and he's going to straighten this conversation out. Join us for more.
The Brothers Network works to debunk and dismantle a singular narrative about who and what African American are, but our focus is the arts and culture. We're not engaged in picket signs, we're not outside, we're very much inside. We're very much the leaders of organizations, universities, we're very much on the inside. And we always have been on the inside. We think about the Harlem Renaissance and the impact that the Harlem Renaissance had in the 1920s up until today. Many people, not me, but many people say that we are the Harlem Renaissance of this particular century.
I'm real honored and happy and proud to be a part of the Brothers Network. In that there are a couple of things. I think it's like a restoration of an idea, of a movement that was at least around during the Harlem Renaissance. And that what you're in the process of is collecting information and images that's invaluable. that will not only show the rich talent of African American men in this country, but give me a chance to feel like I'm one of them. For the most part, I would say that I'm a writer, though I'm employed as a professor at Temple University.
Welcome back to 28 Days in Beyond. And we're on the set with us. We have Gregory Walker.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
From the Brothers Network.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Tell us about the work that you do.
The Brothers Network started out with its foundational principles in high art and high culture based on the work of both James Baldwin and W.B. Du Bois. We thought it was important to look at critical race theory and how we amplify the brilliance of who and what African American men are. We at the Brothers Network almost never use the term boys of color or men of color because we want to identify the authentic reality of being black and a man. So we say African American, the African diaspora, but we don't include people of color. We find that term to be a little bit divisive and centers whiteness versus specifically African American men of the African diaspora. We also don't say, they like to say, youth of color, but we say African American man. We want us to have our full humanity when we say, we never say male, we say man, because we want us to have our full humanity when we talk about who we're talking about and who we're amplifying. We don't want it to be homogenized into this mythical idea of, all people of color are the same, because the experiences that we have as black men, as African men, as men of the African diaspora is insanely unique to our existence, not only here in the United States, but around the world. What we do essentially is amplify artists, intellectuals, thinkers, from Baldwin forward to Baldwin backward. We just really, really are engaged in a historical and cultural narrative that says how great we are. Really to dismantle and debunk any myths and misconceptions about the authentic realness and brilliance of black men around the world. From painters and sculptors to playwrights and thinkers to sports scholars, all of those things are what we do. We have had the pleasure of producing over 300 programs, events in the Philadelphia region and beyond. We have a national board that goes from San Francisco, the University of San Francisco, to Houston, and obviously here in Philadelphia, and Morehouse College as well. So our board and our membership is stacked. We like to brag about the 8,000 people we have every time we send an editorial who get our editorial, who receive our information, who continuously are engaged in what we're doing, and really flipping the script, changing the narrative, increasing the dialogue in a way that makes sense. We believe that we're the only organization, if I might, in the entire country and maybe the world who amplifies black brilliance and the brilliance of black men, not only here in this country, but around the world.
Wow. So why high art and high culture?
Art and culture are the ways in which most people, no matter what your socioeconomic or intellectual capacity is, can appreciate an August Wilson play, right? One of the things we do as a social enterprise nonprofit is also make sure those tickets are available for those who perhaps can't afford it. We have donors and supporters who give in a way that we can offer tickets to people who perhaps have not seen an August Wilson play. August Wilson being one of the greatest playwrights in America, certainly, and maybe around the world, right? I like to tell people that I've seen every single August Wilson play. And so I want that on my gravestone because I think that's important, right? In my early life, I had the pleasure as a waiter in college and waiting on Mr. Wilson, and really those informal conversations that we had as he was writing at a restaurant called Scusi in New Haven were informational for me and really important. So we love this idea of knowing that not everyone has access to high art and high culture. Not everyone can go to a museum. We love Washington, D.C. because the museums there are free, right? And certainly the National Museum of African American History is something that people, if they haven't had a chance to go and see it, should go and see it. But the top floor of that museum really starts with culture. It starts with art. It starts with all the art and art making that African American men and women have been a part of our culture. And sometimes people don't know that. So we are invested to a point that you can't even imagine in ensuring that everyone knows this, right? That this ridiculous co-modified narrative that we're somehow predators and not presidents. Right. We want to dismantle and debunk that completely.
So that's, I mean, I'm first of all, I want to say that I'm very appreciative of the identification as, you know, black or African American males, because the fact is,
you mean men?
Color. See what I'm saying? See what I did there? See what I did there? Because the fact that you know, this term "people of color," you're right. I mean, it does.
It's divisive. It's divisive.
Even if we're talking about, you know, Black History Month, you can say, oh, you know, it's celebrating the heritage of people of color, but it's not specific to the experiences and contributions of African and African American people.
I mean, when we look at the American Constitution, we can look at the 3/5 clause. We can look at all of these things.
Right. That wasn't people of color.
Did not honor our full humanity as people who are black, right?
So.
And so, while we embrace the immigrant community, obviously, and we welcome that, but we also want to be very intentional about the narrative that we're pushing forward and how we do it and sustaining it and growing it, because everyone else is not doing that.
So what would be some of your ultimate objectives?
The ultimate objective is to really change the discourse so that when a policeman sees a black man driving anywhere in this country, right, he automatically does not assume that he is a criminal, but he assumes he's a playwright. He assumes he's an author. He assumes he's a painter. He assumes he's a sculptor. He assumes he's a talk show host. He assumes he's a professor at a university. He assumes that he is the president of the United States or is running for an elected office. He assumes he's a judge. When we get to a point where the larger community and our own communities recognize the pluralism that we bring forward, we will then have accomplished our goal. So we're never going to be out of business.
Lord have mercy.
That's why we're a nonprofit.
Right, certainly. So,
and a social enterprise, right?
You know, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you about this. So you're, you know, specifically working from the philosophies and ideas of James Baldwin and James Baldwin's views of the potential and hope that's represented in sort of the American flag. What about the historical challenges and experiences that may prove, let's just say, challenging to that narrative? Right? So when we come back, we'll have more with Gregory Walker from the Brothers Network, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper.
But then she asked me, she said, you must be in the service, right?
And by that she meant the military service.
Yeah, she meant the military service. And I said, must I have been? And she said, well, yeah, you speak German. And for me, all the work that I had done as a German student, all the trips that I had taken to Austria and Germany on my own, not with the US military, I've never been in the military, all that was reduced to some formula that if I'm black and I've been abroad, that it must have been through the United States military. For me, it said that all the opportunity, all the hard work, all the study that I'd done on my own because I wanted to was irrelevant because I was seen through this one lens as a worker or a fighter.
So I didn't do it myself, but I found these men, two professors, an artist and a PhD in economics. And so we sat down many Saturdays in a coffee shop and cranked out what was to become the Brothers Network. And we had a mission and vision and value statements, and we plugged over them and changed them and edited them and re-edited them until we came out with what we have today to be able to put out not just a narrative, not just storytelling, but an amplification of the brilliance of who and what black men are.
We're in my office. This is the City Year headquarters for City Year Philadelphia, and I assume the role of an executive director and vice president for the organization. I've been with City Year for a little over 6 years now. I think that the dialogue is incredibly important and the awareness is incredibly important about African American men, because we all too often have so many other influences saying, I won't even say the opposite, but just so many negative portrayals that it's just too much to even try to wrap around a label.
So I guess I have two careers. The most important one is as a jazz musician and vocalist and a pianist. And during the day I work in human resources. I was a creative writing major at Dartmouth College, but my poetry is informed by, I guess, reality in a certain regard.
Welcome back to 28 Days. Here with us, Gregory Walker, and we're going to dig a little deeper. I'm going to defer to you, Mara. You had a question before.
So before the break, we started to talk about, you had mentioned the objectives of the Brothers Network, one of which being, when a police officer pulls over a black man, that they will assume different things about them. My question to you...
Wrongly assume.
Wrongly, right. But my question to you...
We want to change that language, right?
Certainly. So my question to you is, mentioning the 3/5 clause, right, of the Constitution, and how fundamentally and foundationally this is how the country was started. The police representing that power structure, right, in that belief system. How can you change the assumptions of police and media and all sort of organs of government without fundamentally changing the very foundational principles of this nation?
So there's a couple things, right? It has to be a multi-pronged disruptive approach, right? In addition to my role as creative director with the Brothers Network, I also serve in an elected position as vice chair of the Democratic Party, right? So I'm a vice chairman, first vice chair in the 5th Ward, which is Center City, Philadelphia, which is mostly where the commerce is. So in that role, I am effectively engaged in vetting the people who become our judges, who become our mayor, who become our state reps. So it's a multi-pronged approach, and that has not really anything to do with the Brothers Network, except for the Brothers Network is invested in democracy, right? Ensuring that there is fair and equal and equitable representation that has like-minded people in charge, right? So the police commissioner is hired by the city, right, and the mayor. So if we have a mayor who is in line with, and I'm just using Philadelphia for example, who's in line with the ideas and the values, right, we'll get a police commissioner who is also in line with those same ideas, right? And that then will, trickle down, if you will, to that policeman on the street. So it has to be a multi-pronged, approach to dismantle and disrupt these notions of inequality. The other piece that you mentioned in terms of, I have to mention the cultural hegemonic. If we center whiteness and we center, quote, the man, and we center this imaginary they, we will never move forward.
What do you mean by that?
What I'm suggesting is that we assume that if just because someone is white, they are right. So I grew up in a small town in Connecticut in Bloomfield, and I was in the top of my class. And so Bloomfield, Connecticut is mostly white and mostly Jewish. But I was in the top of my class, so I knew inherently that just because someone was white, it didn't mean they were smarter than me. It didn't mean they had more access than me, right? And so it's that kind of a beginning and an understanding that just because someone is white or someone is male or someone is a man, that they somehow have more power over you if you are a woman, or someone who is straight has more power than someone who is gay or lesbian or trans. So the entire hegemonic, the cultural hegemonic has to be disrupted. And I think now more than ever, after having a wonderful 8 years under Barack Obama as our leader, we can see that now. When I ask people who their role model is, right, in any community, in a black man, a young black man, I'm thinking he's going to say Barack Obama. And what he often says is, we don't have any role models. The challenge for the Brothers Network, quite frankly, is that people, when you mention the name the Brothers Network, they think we're doing prison reform. I'm glad you laughed, because it's painful. I'm glad you laughed. They think we're involved in some notion to eradicate mass incarceration, right? So I get offers all the time to come and speak, and so grateful that you brothers get it, and so thank you for this opportunity, right? So they think, oh, Brothers Network? Oh, that's prison. What? What?
Well, let me ask you this. Why do you think that's the first thing that come to mind when they hear that phrase?
Well, because there's not enough programs like this one. There's not enough television shows like this one. There isn't enough of a consciousness in Hollywood or in New York or in Philadelphia to recognize that we are of value and we have value, and there aren't enough of us, to your earlier point, in leadership positions to go ahead and affect that change. Excuse me. So it's not just us being in front of the camera, it's also us being behind the camera and also in the office upstairs. So we can't do it just on, it has to be a multi-pronged approach.
You brought up Bloomfield, Connecticut, and
yes.
we talked in our intermission or our dialogue in the beginning. And we talked about why it's critically important to have a sense of self and identity.
That's right.
Now, you being a minority, but you had a majority mindset, right?
I don't think I'm a minority, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying you numbers-wise.
In the world, I am not a minority.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I just want to stop you there if I might.
Go ahead.
Right? The continent of Africa, have you seen how big it is?
It's big. You can fit China in there.
And it's not even as big. It's bigger than it's represented.
I don't feel that I'm a minority.
No.
So go ahead. So I start there.
You're majority in how you think. but the larger point I was making to that was, you didn't feel inferior, predicated on you was the onlyest one, as we would say. What gave you that intrinsic value to have that kind of identity and intestinal fortitude to know that you wasn't inadequate in that environment.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. Let me just say thank you. I appreciate that. I'm a third-generation entrepreneur.
Okay.
So maybe, right, I love my dad. His name is Johnny Walker. No joke, Johnny Walker. And he owned restaurants in Connecticut, in Hartford, Connecticut. And so maybe it came from my dad. Maybe it came from my granddad, right, who owned a store in Florida, right? And so I thought, oh, you know, this is easy, right? Doesn't everybody's father own a store? Doesn't everybody's grandfather own a store? Isn't everybody? So I also now, I love my dad more than you can even ever imagine, because I can't imagine the kind of overt racism that he endured and experienced on a day-to-day basis. I cannot imagine it. So some of it was internal, right? And then some of it was in my neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, it was a small community, mostly white, but across the street was the director of social services who was a black man in my town. Next door was a policeman, actually moved up to detective. On the other side of where I lived in Bloomfield, Connecticut, that small town, was an engineer. These were all black men. So I had in my mind that anything is possible. And I think that that unique experience can be amplified in the digital world today. That's what we try to do with the Brothers Network. We try to amplify someone who's a college professor. When I saw you, I thought you were a college professor. I didn't think you were a rock star. You could be both.
Oh, I am.
And that's the multiplicity of identity.
Certainly. So you talk about that as particularly in relation to the work that the Brothers Network does. Can you tell us a little more about that?
So we're engaged in this idea of not a single narrative, but a multiple narratives for everyone. When I saw you, I said, oh, this brother, he looks like a college professor, and he has a really cool shirt on. And I think maybe he's also traveled, right? Maybe he's been to the continent. Maybe he's been to the Caribbean. So I don't operate, and I want everyone sort of not to operate with this single-mindedness, unfortunately, that has happened, right? Plenty of black men have fathers. In fact, all of us have fathers. Right? All of us have fathers, or the science has really advanced, right? So this idea that black men are absent or not visible is hogwash. I'll use an old word. It's hogwash. We're not absent. We're present. We're there. Studies show that black men are more engaged with their children. But we are pressing against a defense that is imaginary. The boogeyman is imaginary. We're always defending and trying to, so no, black men are present. We're fathers. We're engaged in our children's lives, and we always have been.
Certainly.
We always have been. So we have to dismantle and debunk this false narrative that we're not there. That's the work that we do at the Brothers Network, and we are inclusive. Our funders and supporters are not just black people. They are older white people, they are young white people, they are men, women, children, all races, because they too believe that we have to change this misperception in intentional ways. And the way, again, we accomplish that is by bringing someone to a theater, right, when the playwright is black. The writer of the play is black. I won't say it again, is a black man. The director is an African-American man. The talent on the stage is an African-American man. The people running the microphones and the sound are all African-American men. It's an intentional disruption. I love to, leave our theater events or a book talk. We're having an upcoming talk in a few weeks around the amazing article written by Ta-Nehisi Coates from the Atlantic, right? Ta-Nehisi Coates is amazing, and people don't think he really works at the Atlantic. He's from Baltimore. He didn't happen to go finish his college education. And yet he's one of the most brilliant minds today talking about the brilliance of who and what we are. And there's hundreds of thousands of Ta-Nehisi Coateses in the world. We have small children sometimes coloring and, playing and, well, that's a cartoonist. That's someone who's going to do digital cartooning and make a whole lot of money and do digital games when that time comes and be involved with the things that we're now, in augmented reality. So let's be mindful of what we and how we respond to our young people, right? Maybe this kid is flipping and turning. Well, that's your next swimmer or gymnast. Basketball is a way, but there are multiple sports that one can play. And if we self-define ourselves, then we limit ourselves. Our tagline at the Brothers Network is Black Beyond Boundaries.
We're going to take a pause for the calls.
Yeah, when we come back, we'll have our final thoughts.
Here is New York City. Tonight we're here with a conversation with Coleman Domingo and Patricia McGregor, part of the Brothers Network's audience development. And so consistent with what we do in Philadelphia and other places, we have the stars of the stage who are with us in the audience as well as on stage.
Coleman Domingo, the Olivier Tony Drama Desk Drama League Award nominated, and Obie Glad and Lucille Lortel award-winning actor, stars in the AMC original series Fear the Walking Dead.
Coleman's work you would know from television, from film, from the stage. He's a quintessential Renaissance man, and so when we think about the Renaissance, we think about Coleman Domingo.
Talk a little bit about where you were born, a little bit about the early years.
I grew up in very, very working class West Philly, and when I took an acting class as an elective, someone told me for the first time that I had a gift, and said that my gift was not only as an actor, he said, you're a storyteller. I was a journalism major. I wanted to document. I wanted to tell stories. I didn't know exactly how to do it, but I eventually realized that I'm a bit more of an archivist. The things that I write, I sort of like try to hold the history of my neighborhood. I'm a regional playwright, like August Wilson or Ethel Fugard. All my stories have something to do with West Philly.
We're back with 28 Days and Beyond, and we're going to give our final thoughts. How can we participate in changing the narrative and the things that you described earlier?
Well, it's a little bit self-serving. I say become a member of the Brothers Network. It's a short line, right? Follow us on Twitter, right? Yep. At the BroNet, right? Yeah. And for yourself, think about what you do and how you respond when you see 3 or 4 black men, one with dreads, one with glasses, 2 with glasses, one who's 6'5", walking down the street. Check yourself. Yeah, yeah. If you immediately feel fear or you feel comfortable. So I'm going to ask each of us to take a Buddhist breath, if you will. Just take a deep breath and exhale. And so think about how you're responding. It's not anybody else. How are you responding as a black man, as a white woman, whomever is watching today? Think about when you get into an elevator and you're a white woman. Think about how you might respond. Because that guy probably is not going to rob you, right? He's probably going to, the same floor you are and going to participate in the same thing. And I want to be clear about changing the narrative. We have to start with ourselves. Yeah. So I'm going to ask people to just take a deep breath when you see a black man and say, oh, I wonder what he's about. Ask yourself that question, right? Every single time that happens for you. When you feel that rise up in you of tension, whether you're black or white, and you see a black man in the street, I'm going to ask you. So that's what we can do. We can start with ourselves, each of us doing that every time we encounter a black man, and that fear will dissipate. Because it's a ridiculous notion. It does not exist.
I mean, I guess the mic has been dropped. Gregory Walker, we want to thank you for joining us on 28 Days and Beyond, where we reflect and celebrate our history, our heritage, and our culture in our own authentic voice. Until next time, peace.